Everyone in the village was shocked when the truth came out. The sun was just beginning to rise over the tall palm trees, casting long shadows across the dusty paths of the small African village. It was a place where everyone knew each other, where secrets were nearly impossible to keep. The laughter of children usually filled the air, and the rhythmic pounding of pestles against mortars echoed from the women preparing food. But on this particular morning, silence lingered. Whispers carried faster than the morning breeze, and people gathered in small groups, murmuring about the story that had shaken the entire community. The man at the center of this storm was known by everyone. Strong, hard-working, and gentle in spirit, he had always been admired for the way he carried himself. He was the kind of man who would help an elder fetch water without being asked, or share his last meal with a hungry child in the neighborhood. To the villagers he was not only a husband but also a proud father. Many often looked up to him as an example of what a real family man should be. For years they had watched him cradle his little boy in his arms, guiding him through the dusty paths, teaching him how to fish in the river, and showing him how to till the soil. To anyone looking from the outside, they were the perfect picture of father and son. His smile whenever the child called him Papa seemed to light up the entire village. But behind that smile, hidden deep in the shadows of his heart, lay a truth that he had discovered, a truth that threatened to shatter everything he held dear. The whispers started small. A neighbor spoke to another, a woman at the river hinted at it, and before long the entire village was buzzing with the same shocking story. The child he had raised and loved all these years was not his own blood. The revelation spread like wildfire, and soon, every corner of the village echoed with disbelief. How could such a thing happen? How could a man live for so long without knowing the truth? But what truly stunned the community was not the revelation itself, it was his response. Many expected him to react with anger, to turn his back on the child, or even to abandon the woman who had betrayed his trust. That would have been the natural thing to do, the response most men in the village admitted they would choose if placed in his shoes. Yet, instead of walking away, instead of letting bitterness consume him, he made a decision that no one anticipated. He chose love. And in that choice he gave the village, and perhaps the entire world, a lesson in what it truly means to be a father. This is the story of a man who was not the father by blood, but who became the father by heart. A story of sacrifice, resilience, and unconditional love. A story that begins with betrayal but ends with a powerful message that blood does not always define family. And it all started with that one shocking truth that shook the village to its core. The village was alive in its own rhythm, a rhythm that never changed with time. At dawn, the roosters crowed, their calls echoing through the cluster of mud huts with thatched roofs. Smoke began to rise gently from cooking fires, curling into the pale blue sky as women prepared the first meal of the day. The scent of firewood mixed with the earthy smell of damp soil, reminding everyone that life here was tied to the land. Children, barefoot and full of energy, ran along the dusty paths, chasing each other with laughter that could be heard across the fields. Some carried small calabashes of water balanced carefully on their heads, learning responsibility from a young age. Others followed their mothers to the river, where the women gathered to wash clothes, pound cassava, and exchange the latest village stories. It was there at the riverbank that whispers often traveled fastest, spreading news, secrets, and gossip like ripples on water. The men of the village moved in their own rhythm. At first light, some headed to the fields with hoes and cutlasses, ready to tend to their crops. Their hands were calloused, their backs strong, for farming was not just a livelihood, it was the backbone of survival. Others led their cattle to graze, or cast nets into the river to provide fish for their families. Each man knew his role, and in fulfilling it, he earned the respect of his community. Evenings were perhaps the most magical time. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, the villagers gathered in small circles. Elders told folk tales under the baobab tree, their voices deep and wise, teaching children lessons hidden within the stories. The sound of drums often filled the air, and young men and women danced barefoot on the earth, their bodies moving in perfect rhythm with the beat. Laughter, song, and unity held the village together like invisible threads. But beneath this harmony there was also judgment. In a place where everyone knew everyone, reputations mattered. The life of one family was never private. The community had eyes and ears everywhere. A whispered rumor could grow into a roaring storm overnight, and respect could be lost as quickly as it was gained. This was the world in which the man lived. A village where the strength of a man was measured not only by the size of his harvest but also by the way he carried his family. Where a father was expected to protect his children, provide for them, and ensure his name lived on through their bloodline. To fail in this duty was shameful, and to raise another man's child, unthinkable. Yet, in this very village where tradition and honor ruled every decision, he would soon face the greatest test of his life. The fields, the river, the gossiping women, and the storytelling elders, they would all bear witness to his struggle. The village setting was not just a backdrop to his story, it was the stage where his love, pain, and courage would unfold. In the heart of the village lived a man whose name carried weight and respect. He was strong but gentle, a man whose presence brought comfort to those around him. His hands bore the marks of hard work, the kind that tilled the land, built homes, and provided food. Yet, behind his rugged appearance was a heart full of tenderness. And it was this heart that was captured by a woman whose beauty and grace had long turned heads in the community. She was not only beautiful in appearance but in spirit. Her laughter rang like music, lightening the mood wherever she went. She carried herself with dignity, balancing the duties of village life with a warmth that made her well loved among the women. When she walked to the river with a water pot on her head, people often admired the ease and elegance with which she moved. Many men had noticed her, but it was this hard-working man who won her heart. Their love was not born out of riches or grand gestures, but out of small acts of care. He would help her gather firewood after a long day. She would prepare his favorite meal when he returned tired from the fields. They shared stolen glances during community gatherings, and when their hands brushed, both felt the spark of a bond that seemed unbreakable. In a village where marriages were often arranged, theirs blossomed from true affection. When they finally stood before family and elders to declare their union, the whole village celebrated. Drums beat loudly, dancers filled the dusty square, and elders gave their blessings. People said they were a perfect match, two souls destined to walk through life together. And indeed, they dreamed of the same future. A home filled with laughter, children running barefoot in the yard, and a legacy carried on through sons and daughters. For a time that dream seemed to come true. The day she told him she was expecting a child, he felt his world expand with joy. His chest swelled with pride as he imagined holding his own blood, his own son or daughter. He worked harder in the fields, making sure their future would be secure. He began carving a small wooden cradle with his own hands, smoothing the wood carefully as though every stroke of his knife was a promise to his unborn child. She too dreamed of motherhood. She sang lullabies while preparing meals, touching her growing belly with a smile that radiated happiness. Together they spoke of the future, how their child would go to school, learn the traditions of their people, and carry the family's name with honor. Their love story was one admired by many. In the eyes of the village they were the example of what marriage should be: love, respect, and shared dreams. But within that dream was a hidden secret, one that would one day shatter the man's heart. For while he was preparing to be a father, fate was preparing him for a test far greater than he could have ever imagined. The day of the child's birth dawned like no other. The air was thick with excitement, and the whole village seemed to hold its breath. In African village life, the birth of a child was more than a family affair. It was a community celebration, a continuation of lineage, a sign that life and tradition would carry on. And for this couple, the moment was filled with overflowing joy and pride. When the cries of the newborn first broke through the quiet of the night, the news spread faster than fire through dry grass. Women rushed to the family hut with wide smiles, carrying warm water and soft cloths, eager to assist and share in the happiness. The men outside exchanged congratulatory handshakes, some nodding with approval, others laughing with relief as though they themselves had welcomed a child into the world. Inside, the man's heart swelled with pride as he gazed upon the tiny, fragile figure in the arms of his wife. The child's skin was soft, the fists clenched tight, and the little cries filled him with a sense of purpose he had never known before. This was his blood, his legacy, the child he had dreamed of during long hours in the fields. He felt a tear escape his eye, but he did not wipe it away. For him, it was not a moment of weakness but of overwhelming strength, the strength of becoming a father. His wife, exhausted yet glowing, looked at him with tired but loving eyes. The bond between them seemed unshakable at that moment. They had dreamed of this day and now it was real. She handed the baby gently to him and for the first time he cradled the child in his arms. His large, rough hands, worn from years of farming, trembled slightly as he held the tiny body. The child was so small, yet he felt as though the entire world rested in his palms. Soon the village gathered to celebrate. Elders offered blessings, women ululated in high-pitched joy, and children peeked curiously through the door, eager to see the newest member of the community. The baby was seen as not just the child of two people, but the child of the entire village. A new hope, a new promise for the future. As tradition demanded, the baby was given a name that carried meaning. The name symbolized strength and continuity, a reminder that every life was part of a larger story. The man stood tall as the name was announced, his chest filled with pride. Neighbors clapped him on the back, calling him Papa, congratulating him for the blessing of fatherhood. That night, as the fire crackled outside their home and the village slowly settled into sleep, the man remained awake for a long time, watching the baby breathe peacefully beside its mother. He whispered promises to himself, that he would provide, protect, and teach, that his son would grow into a man of honor. At that moment, there was no doubt in his mind, nor in the minds of anyone in the village. This was his child. His joy was pure, his love unconditional, and his dreams stronger than ever. But hidden in the shadows of fate was a truth no one yet saw, a truth that would one day shake this joy to its very foundation. The years passed quickly, and the little boy grew before everyone's eyes. He ran barefoot along the dusty paths, played with other children under the baobab tree, and clung to his father's hand whenever they walked together. To the villagers, they were inseparable, a picture of perfect fatherhood. The man taught his son how to hold a fishing net, how to guide a hoe through the soil, and how to greet elders with respect. Every smile from the child filled him with pride. But life in the village had a way of stirring secrets to the surface. Nothing stayed hidden forever. What began as a whisper at the riverbank soon grew into a murmur in the market, and eventually became a storm that could not be ignored. The women spoke first, their voices low but cutting. "Have you noticed? The boy does not look like his father." Others nodded, saying his features resembled another man in the village, a man whose paths had once crossed with the woman. At first the father ignored the talk. Villagers always found something to gossip about, he thought. But the whispers followed him, in the fields, by the river, even in the evenings when the drums played. He could not escape the doubt that had been planted in his heart. One evening, after weeks of torment, he confronted his wife. The fire burned low in their hut as he asked the question that had haunted him. "Tell me the truth, is this child truly mine?" His voice was steady, but his heart pounded like a drum of war. She avoided his eyes, her silence louder than any words she could have spoken. Finally, with tears rolling down her cheeks, she confessed. The boy, the child he had loved and raised with all his heart, was not his blood. In her loneliness before their marriage, she had made a mistake that had followed her into their union. The man's world shattered in an instant. His chest tightened, his breath grew heavy, and it felt as though the very ground beneath him had crumbled. He looked at the sleeping child nearby, innocent, peaceful, unaware, and felt a storm of emotions. Anger at the betrayal, humiliation from the gossip, sorrow for the years he had lived believing a lie. When the truth reached the village, the whispers became open discussions. Men shook their heads in disbelief, some mocking him, others pitying him. Women murmured about the wife's shame, while children repeated the story they had overheard from their parents. His pride, once so strong, now seemed stripped away. The man stood at a crossroads. His honor as a husband had been wounded, his reputation as a father questioned. Every tradition, every expectation told him to walk away, to cast off the woman and disown the child. Yet, as he looked at the boy who called him Papa with so much love, he felt the weight of a choice greater than himself. This was the moment that would define not only his life but his legacy. Would he let blood decide who he was as a father, or would love speak louder than the truth? The days that followed were some of the darkest in the man's life. Sleep became a stranger, and his heart carried a heaviness that no words could ease. At night, he would lie awake beside his wife, staring at the thatched roof above him, his mind replaying the confession over and over. Each time he heard her words echo in his head, "The child is not yours," it felt like a spear piercing his chest. When he stepped outside, the weight of the village's eyes fell on him. Men who once greeted him with respect now offered pitying looks, some even smirking behind his back. "How can a man raise another man's son?" they whispered loudly enough for him to hear. Women at the river spoke in hushed tones, shaking their heads. "If it were my husband, he would have left long ago," one said. Another added, "No man should carry another man's burden." The gossip spread like wildfire, and soon children repeated the cruel words they overheard from adults. His son, innocent and unaware, once came running to him with wide eyes and asked, "Papa, why are people laughing at us?" The question pierced him deeper than any gossip could. He forced a smile for the boy, but inside he was breaking. Tradition too weighed heavily against him. In their culture, bloodlines were sacred. A man's legacy was carried through his own children, his own seed. Elders reminded him of this in subtle but pointed ways. One evening an elder pulled him aside and said, "My son, a tree that carries another man's fruit cannot claim it as its own. You must think of your name, your honor, your lineage." These words cut deep. He respected the wisdom of the elders, yet his heart resisted their advice. His wife's presence only added to the turmoil. He felt betrayed, yet he could not bring himself to hate her completely. She too suffered under the weight of shame. Her eyes, once full of joy, now rarely met his. She moved quietly through the village, avoiding the stares and whispers. At night, she wept silently, her tears a reminder of the wound she had caused. But the hardest struggle of all was within his own heart. Each time he looked at the boy, his chest tightened. This child, though not his by blood, had become the center of his world. He had been there from the first cry, the first steps, the first words. The boy's laughter was his light, his hugs his strength. How could he turn away now? How could he deny the bond they had built simply because of what the blood said? Yet the pressure mounted each day. Some men urged him to leave the child behind and start fresh with a new wife. Others mocked him openly, calling him weak for clinging to a child not his own. In their eyes, he was not a man of strength, but a fool blinded by love. He was torn between two worlds, one that demanded he protect his pride, and another that whispered of a deeper truth, that love was greater than blood. His struggle was not only against the voices of the village, but against the storm raging inside his own soul. The man's heart was torn in two. On one side stood pride, tradition, and the voice of the village that told him to walk away. On the other stood love, the bond he had built with the child who knew no other father but him. Night after night, he wrestled with the decision, pacing the floor of his hut, his mind restless. His hands, calloused from years of labor, now trembled with the weight of a choice that would define the rest of his life. He remembered the first time he had held the boy in his arms, the way the child's tiny fingers had curled around his own. He remembered the boy's first steps, the way he had stumbled forward and fallen into his embrace. He remembered teaching him to fish, the child's laughter echoing across the river when the net pulled in its first catch. Every memory reminded him that fatherhood was not only about blood, it was about presence, sacrifice, and love. One evening, after a long day in the fields, he sat by the fire with his son. The boy leaned against him, eyes heavy with sleep, and whispered softly, "Papa, I love you." The words pierced him in the most unexpected way. At that moment, all the gossip, all the shame, all the whispers of doubt melted away. What mattered was not the blood in the boy's veins, but the love in his heart. The next morning he rose with a new resolve. He walked through the village with steady steps, ignoring the whispers that followed him. Neighbors watched closely, wondering what his decision would be. Would he cast the child away as many expected? Would he reclaim his pride by starting over? Instead he surprised them all. He stood tall before the elders and declared, "This boy is mine. He may not carry my blood, but he carries my name, my love, and my life. I will raise him as my own, for fatherhood is not only given by birth, it is chosen by the heart." The words rippled through the crowd, silencing the murmurs. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others admired his courage, but no one could deny the strength in his voice. He had chosen a path few men dared to walk, a path of sacrifice, of defiance against tradition, but also of the deepest love. At home his wife wept, overwhelmed by his choice. Though her betrayal still weighed heavy between them, his decision gave her hope that healing was possible. For the boy, nothing changed. He still ran to his father with open arms, still laughed at his side, still called him Papa, with the same pure affection. The man realized then that the bond they shared could never be broken by truth or rumor. By choosing love over pride, he carried a burden few would understand, but in doing so, he also carried a strength greater than himself. He had decided not just to be a man but to be a father, not by blood but by heart. From the day he made his decision, the man never looked back. The boy remained at the center of his world, and though the whispers of the village never completely faded, they became nothing more than distant echoes compared to the joy of raising his child. Each morning before the sun rose, he would gently wake the boy, lifting him onto his shoulders as they walked to the fields together. The boy giggled as he rode high above the ground, pointing out birds in the trees and calling out greetings to neighbors. In the fields, the father placed a small hoe in his son's hands, showing him how to press it into the earth. Though the boy's attempts were clumsy, the man laughed with pride, encouraging him with every effort. "One day you will be stronger than me," he would say. At the river he taught the boy how to fish. Together they cast their nets into the shimmering water, waiting patiently for the catch. When the boy pulled in his first fish, he danced with excitement, his laughter echoing across the riverbank. The father clapped proudly, lifting the boy onto his shoulders as though he had conquered the world. But it wasn't only about work and skills. He also gave the boy the gift of play. In the evenings, as the sun painted the sky with fiery colors, they played in the open fields. The father chased him through the tall grass, their laughter mingling with the sounds of crickets and drumming in the distance. Sometimes they sat under the baobab tree, carving little wooden animals together, the father's strong hands guiding the boy's small fingers. Protection, too, became his sacred duty. When the boy fell and scraped his knee, the father was the first to run to his side, lifting him gently and whispering, "You are strong, my son." When older boys teased him in the playground, the father stood tall, reminding them that kindness was greater than cruelty. He became not only a shield but also a source of courage, teaching his son that true strength came from love, not fear. Providing for the boy gave his life renewed purpose. Every day in the fields, every basket of yams, the man's decision did not go unnoticed. In a village where everyone's life was woven into the fabric of the community, his choice to raise a child that was not his own became a story on every tongue. Some villagers continued to criticize him harshly. Around the fires at night, men shook their heads and muttered, "He has lost his pride. No real man would carry another man's bloodline." They mocked him quietly, some even to his face. To them, he was a fool blinded by love, a man too weak to walk away from betrayal. Women at the river whispered to one another, "What kind of husband forgives such a thing? What example is he setting for our daughters?" These words were sharp, cutting through the air like knives. The man heard them, but he carried himself with quiet dignity, refusing to respond with anger. But not everyone saw weakness in his decision. There were others who admired him deeply. Elders, though bound by tradition, could not ignore the strength it took for him to choose love over pride. One old man, seated beneath the shade of the baobab tree, told the younger men, "You call him weak, but I see strength. To walk away is easy. To stay in love despite the pain, that is the mark of true courage." His words began to shift the thinking of some. Women, too, began to see the story differently. Some whispered admiration for the way he cared for the child, saying, "A man who loves like this is rare. His heart is bigger than his pride." Mothers watched the way he held the boy's hand, the way he laughed with him at the river, the way he never allowed gossip to break their bond. Quietly, many began to teach their daughters that such love, though unusual, was a gift. The children of the village adored him. To them, he was simply Papa, a man who carried his son on his shoulders, who carved toys for them out of wood, who told stories by the fire. They did not care about bloodlines or gossip. They cared only about love and presence. His son especially looked at him with eyes full of pride, never doubting for a moment who his father truly was. Over time the gossip began to soften, while some still clung to their criticism. As the years passed, the bond between the man and his son only grew stronger. The child flourished under his care, strong, respectful, and full of life. The village watched as the boy grew tall, his steps confident, his heart kind. And though some still whispered about bloodlines and betrayal, most could no longer deny what they saw with their own eyes. The boy was the reflection of his father, not in features but in character. The man had taught him to fish, to farm, and to honor the elders. More than that, he had taught him what it meant to love, to forgive, and to stand strong even when the world turned against you. In every action, the boy carried his father's values, proving that true inheritance is not only in the blood, but in the lessons passed from heart to heart. By the time the boy became a young man, the village's whispers had faded into silence. Where people once criticized, they now admired. Where they once doubted, they now respected. Some even confessed quietly, "We judged too quickly. This man has shown us that fatherhood is more than blood." One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky glowed in shades of gold and red, the father and son sat beneath the baobab tree. The boy looked at him with eyes full of gratitude and said, "Papa, I will never forget what you have done for me. You have shown me the meaning of love." The man smiled, his heart swelling with peace. In that moment he knew every sacrifice, every tear, every struggle had been worth it. And so his story became more than just gossip in a small village. It became a lesson for all who heard it. A reminder that family is not always about bloodlines, but about the bonds we choose to create. A reminder that true strength lies not in pride but in sacrifice. Many men could father a child by blood, but it takes a greater man to father a child by choice. This is the lesson his life taught the village and perhaps anyone willing to listen. Backhand index pointing right. Fatherhood is not just about blood, It's about love, sacrifice, and choice. The man had not only raised a child, he had raised a legacy. And in doing so, he proved that the truest measure of a father is not what runs through the veins, but what flows from the heart.